the whole segment just poof, gone.
I mean, I'm honestly surprised that you guys don't do that regularly, like almost every time I talk, to where there's just a hole.
I mean, you could say that about at least the two of us. Zack and Dan, by the way, Fairly KickAss podcast. Jay seems to have more gravitas to his delivery than the two of us do.
And he apparently made the right decisions to not be a part of this. He took off and is enjoying some well-deserved R&R. Like, no, you two schmucks can't take this one.
Yeah, I'm telling y'all, when Jay gets back, the caliber of these shows is going to increase 100-fold.
But for now, hope. Oh, I'm sorry, I blew the line. Damn.
we can't even get our own inside jokes right.
Well, I don't think there's any better way to start this edition of the Fairly KickAss podcast.
Tremendous work. We done good.
We did something
good. Oh God. Like I said, it's Zack here. It's Dan there. We are minus a J once again for the next few shows for the next month or so. He will be back. We promise. As far as we know, he still likes us and wants to hang out with us. But for now, you're stuck with us.
Yeah, I'm like sort of taking that dead horse head in my bed thing as a joke. Not like he was serious about anything like that.
Oh, he plays ribs like that on me all the time.
Oh, yeah, no. Big ribber. Well, it felt like the vibe was right to bring that particular segment back. And it's been in the news recently with a number of lawsuits actually going through. So it seemed like a great time to talk about the use of AI and music and everything that comes with it. So, no, not just a tiny, very niche topic, really.
Yeah. The good, the bad, the ugly, the very ugly. We're certainly not going to pull punches here. We know it's a fairly passionate topic for a lot of folks, just AI in general, and how it impacts multiple different slices of the world. But yeah, we want to give it as much due as the topic should have.
Well, and I thought that was something really interesting because as I was trying to wrap my head around a lot of stuff and reading research, it's impressive the amount of stuff that's been written about this in the last year or so. And it's obviously because the music industry and creative in general are just like the rest of us trying to figure out how AI and machine learning fits into our everyday lives, because it's just going to be. Just like we've accepted other aspects of the internet and other aspects of technology doing things in our lives for us or making things easier to do, AI and machine learning is just going to be the next step in that. And really the questions, a lot of what I've read is twofold. First, the actual technical applications, which we can get into, and both creation and assisting creation. And then the ethical side of it really is if a machine makes it, is it still art? And what that does to the actual human side of creating art.
For sure. And that, I mean, both of those topics have a lot of different tendrils, a lot of nuance to both of them. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation.
And interestingly enough, well, twofold is that number one, I think I'm going to be one of those annoying fence sitters because I can understand arguments from multiple sides in this. Sure. But two, I came upon an article, and I think that I could start off with a quote. It comes from an associate professor in the School of Media Arts and Studies at Ohio University, Josh Antonuccio. And in his write-up, he says, quote, I think you have arguments about how much humanity matters and what that means about the role of songwriters and creativity moving forward. But art is art, and the technology of the last 100 years in particular has enabled artists to achieve extraordinary creative feats. AI is now a part of that continuum, albeit with a much more powerful tool set.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's I think when you talk about the ethics, and that's why I'm really stoked to kind of look at this because it is two arguments. It's the technical side. It's the what can this tool do? And then it's the ethical side, which is should this tool be allowed to do what it can do? And I feel like as far as AI ethically, you always have to kind of start at the source, right? The source of the training, the machine learning, as you mentioned, the gobs and gobs of data that's used to train these AI engines, whether it be, obviously we're focusing on music, but this is true for really any kind of generative AI. Where are these sources coming from? And I think that's where, at least for me, where I get into more of the ethical side in my own head, because these sources, a lot of times, not always, and I'll get into at least one case where that is being done, as good as it can be. But a lot of those times, I feel like those sources are not as retrieved fairly with giving compensation, giving credit to the artists who created fill in the blank as they should be.
And that's something that's being wrestled, and you may be ready to refer to the lawsuit was filed in the last week or so about that. But it's also something there's been a fight, and of course I can't remember which organization filed it. I want to say it was AP, about I believe it was their AI, and if I'm incorrect, please correct me in the comments or on our tweet box thing, a tweet page, or the face talk, TickTube, whatever we're on.
Got it in one.
Zack has them written down. I don't, but
I don't have it written down.
If I remember, there was a lawsuit involving the two of them and ChatGPT, as they've been actually kind of notorious for starting to farm out stories exclusive to AI writers, and then the writers that learned how to write news stories from them suing, going, "You took our work." Like, it doesn't matter if you quote unquote learned from it, that you're using our voices for your tool.
Right.
And that's just one part of it. And that's a big thing I think is going to be an issue going forward, not just in, lyrically or production wise, but as we've seen, literally taking voices and reproducing them.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not even metaphorical anymore. This is literally what's happening. You did mention that lawsuit, and I think it is going to be interesting. Probably the best time to bring it up is now. There are several labels that are plaintiffs. I don't know if they're individual lawsuits, if they're all, kind of lumped into the same. I'd imagine they're all separate, but all of the big labels that you would expect, Warner Music Group, Universal, Sony, basically saying what you would expect them to say, like these AI tools stole, our work without giving attribution, without licensing. I feel like it's a completely different discussion as to, this being something that I'm sure songwriters and artists have spoken out about ad nauseum. But now that it's starting to become a problem on a more financial level, now the labels care. Because it's certainly financially motivated for the labels, for sure. It's not about art to them.
Oh, I mean, no. And that's the bread and butter of things, especially when it comes to technological advances. When the money starts getting involved is when the players start getting involved, which means the labels. And that's basically when things start moving one way or the other. And those lawsuits you're referring to, Sony, Warner, Universal taking on AI music companies Suno and Udio. And it's going to be an interesting case to see how this goes, because no doubt the companies are going to fall back on that fair use, the idea of the fair use doctrine. And the question is going to be, how is that law interpreted? Because like the idea of fair use is usually been historically allowed for things like parody, or news reporting or commentary. But using these copyrighted works to teach someone or teach a program and then turn out a similar sounding product doesn't, even though there's no money involved yet necessarily, doesn't fall under any of those fair use categories. So
for sure,
how will some judge is going to have a dramatic effect on music, probably even bigger than the judge in the Blurred Lines lawsuit.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. And I was thinking of like past, obviously there's no precedent for this lawsuit. I think it's going to be at least to this point, one of, if not the most influential, the most important lawsuit in terms of just generative AI across the board. There could certainly be a ripple effect for companies, even as big as Chat GPT and OpenAI, to say like, well, shit, we can't do this anymore because they may be coming for us next.
Right.
It's similar, at least to me, to some of the legalities and some of the lawsuits around like peer-to-peer file sharing back in like the 90s and the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah. Perfect examples.
Your Napster, your Kazaa, your BearShare, whoever the case may be, they certainly, and I think Napster was kind of most front and center, but where is the culpability there in doing that? Because Napster could say, we're not stealing the music, we're just giving people the tool, kind of going back to that word again, we're giving people the tool that they need. They're doing whatever they choose to with it. I feel like there's a lot of corollary.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why we don't have Napster anymore, or didn't, and haven't for a while, just because it's the idea that essentially being the facilitator of theft does not protect you against the culpability for that theft. I think is the best way to look at it. Like, nope, I was going to try with a comparison, but it was just going to go flat, so I figured it's best to abandon it right away than try to get halfway through.
No, I think you're spot on though. That it's I think I said before there wasn't a precedent. I think you just kind of prove that there is, at least a decently strong precedent in those early cases. Like you cannot say I'm the facilitator, I wash my hands of it. Whatever happens is you're still the operator of this tool. You're still providing this functionality with the express purpose of having a fairly good idea how it's going to be used, or at least the different ways it could be used.
Right. And I think before we go too far down this line into legal thought, because that's obviously these things are still going to be tried in a court case, and we may be years away from getting a clear answer. And of course, by the time we get this clear answer, we're probably going to be on a completely different generation of this technology where the answers now, say 5 years from now, may be answering the wrong question.
That's a great point. Yeah.
But I guess we can go back to the ethical side of it. And I think where it's harder right now looking at it, and again, we do this with the caveat being neither of us are musicians. So neither of us are actively creating music. We're creating content about music, but we're the lazy critique side. We're not actually in the trenches making music. So there's a different connection, I think, and to a couple of the musicians I've talked to about this at length, there's a different connection to the feeling almost of having your craft almost devalued because, well, we got a computer program that can do the same thing you do. So why do we need you around? And that, I guess, is where that ethical standard lies. But I also think that's where the room for fence sitting lies. So I guess I'll just kind of toss that immensely loaded question your way and see kind of where you're feeling out about it.
Well, I can't claim to have any semblance of the level of creativity that artists have, whether it be music artists, visual, video, whatever the case may be, that may have AI tools that can generate that same output as artists could. But I can at least speak from a personal standpoint. I'm a software developer when I'm not behind the microphone. And I distinctly remember this was maybe a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, somewhere around there. And Chat GPT was still this fun, novel thing as far as I knew. It's like, oh, this can create some parody songs that are based on Carrie Underwood, but you replace a word with fart or something, and everyone laughs. It's the coolest thing. But I thought certainly this couldn't do what I do. What I do is really cool. It takes a lot of brain power. I had to go to school. I didn't, but I had to, admittedly. But this isn't just a thing that a computer could just do my job. Spoiler alert, it could. It absolutely could. I gave it a prompt to say, program this thing, And in a programming language that is not at all very well known, not at all very widely used whatsoever, very niche, very small population of folks that know how to program in this language. It banged it out in like 5 seconds. And that was the point for me that I realized, like, oh shit, I'm replaceable. I'm more replaceable than I thought. And it was not even being a creative person, it was still a very sobering thought. So being someone who is creative, who can produce these wonderful, beautiful works of art and then have the same feeling of, oh shit, this computer is going to do it. And it's also doing it based on the content that maybe I and maybe friends of mine and other people that I admire have fed into it. I can't imagine how much more sobering that thought would be for them.
And as you understand, like, I completely get where that's a major point of pushback is going. Are we really literally programming ourselves out of use? I mean, being a marketing professional, I understand the same thing. Is we're kind of also under, being guided like, hey, start embracing some of these tools. It can help you do your job. And initially, I admit to when this thing was rolled out in my office, and I haven't yet embraced and actually gotten my hands in the dirt yet. So that is that. But at least I got past the initial mentality of, well, that's it. We're all getting fired next week because they don't need us to write. We don't need us to write marketing material anymore. There's just going to be one person feeding prompts into a chat bot, and then they're going to turn it out and edit it for grammar. And then what are we going to be useful for?
Right.
And getting past that mentality is really difficult because it's almost natural. It's a threat to your livelihood. So naturally, there's going to be pushback. So that part I completely understand. The problem that we're always going to wander through is, and this is where I would claim to be a fence sitter, because there's going to be valuable tasks that these tools can do to assist in production, to help jumpstart the creative process. And that's really loose terms in that one, but there's ways that this is going to help do the job. But there's also always going to be people who are going to use it to do the job to their benefit at the cost of others. Like there is in every aspect of technology.
For sure.
And trying to find that butter zone is really the worst, or what's going to take the most amount of work. Really in every aspect, but especially the creative sides.
And that is, I don't want to say it's necessarily unfortunate for the AI companies, because they're still companies. This isn't an altruistic, let's save the world effort from your open AIs and your chat GPTs and what have you. They're in this for profit. They're businesses. But at the same time, there is a lot of good, just objectively, that AI as a technology could do. And it is absolutely fairly going to always be lumped in with the ethical side of things. It should be 100%. They're inseparable. But like you mentioned, there were a couple of things that I had kind of noted. I'm sure that there are way more than just the few that I kind of jotted down. But you mentioned like using AI for production and for mastering versus for the creation of music. And that's kind of where I got into my own mental gray areas. Is this different? Is this more acceptable? Is this acceptable full stop? Is it the same as any AI usage? You mentioned the production part. Like, let's say, one example that I came across was like separating stems. You have a track that you as an artist produced, or that you as a producer were provided by the artist that you're working with, by the artist that's paying you. And, you wanted an easy way to take that full track and separate out the isolated parts, the drums, the vocals, the guitars, and so forth, to make it a lot easier for your production. Is that the same as going into one of these programs and typing out "create a rock song"? Which for research purposes is something that I absolutely did with a varying degree of output. I think it is, I think there is a difference there. I think there's still an ethical discussion to be had no matter what the case is. But I do think that those use cases are different. I think it's fair to look at them in a different light too.
It's you mentioned that because I was sent a video from, yes, okay, and I want to say it's no a day old, if that, from when we were recording this, from homie Glenn at Spectre Sound Studios, just up the road in Windsor, and he made a point about that, and in his own delivery way, he made the point about using AI tools to help complete a track. He specifically works to put it with engineering metal bands. That's his niche. And he made the exact same point that the use of that to him is coming dangerously to just making the most generic, not unimaginative to a certain point, but the safest type of music. And also agree with the point that he makes that if all you're doing is lining the lines up and pushing a button and letting the AI fix all the mistakes, are you actually an engineer, or are you just someone putting up lines in a grid?
That's a great point.
And that's a perfect example of that. Those two competing ideas, like, can AI help this process and therefore save you time if there's certain things that it can do without you having to go back and do all those things into each individual track? Probably. Does that take away some of the creativity? A little bit, but does it also allow you to be creative in other areas when it comes to producing a piece of music? Like I said, there's way too many right now. There's still way too many swings to the sky is falling, or this will be revolutionary pendulum. And it's firing back and forth because it's easy to do when there's this level of emotion involved. You get it. A lot of people get emotional about their art and the stuff they produce. I completely understand.
For sure.
I mean, you wouldn't understand that we feel the same way to a certain point just by listening to this show. But, we do invest some, I don't think emotion is the right word. But we do more than just throw up it against the wall and hope it sticks. But regardless.
No,
that wasn't landing. I was trying to draw it out until he finally made a reaction.
This has been like one of the more serious shows we've done, so I'm a little slow on the uptake in that arena today.
I mean, but yeah, no, like, and I could, like I said, that's a very interesting argument, is how much of the talent side of creation can be completely pulled out of this by using these tools. And does that now doom us to even more generic sounding music, which many of the old people on the internet think that everything sounds the same, and it's already at that 0 point?
For sure. Yeah, you make a great point that even though it's not the artist per se, every bit of that process does involve creativity and does involve a skill level. And I think if you replace either or both of those things in any respect, is it fair to the people who have that creativity and or who have that skill set that, they're no longer able to do the thing, or rather that they are not being likely not being compensated as much because there's more competition now? Because why would I pay a producer? I don't know what a producer rate is, so I'm just going to put out a number. Why would I pay this producer $10,000 when I could buy this computer program for $99 a month?
Right. And that was exactly kind of the point he was making when you're looking at that, and the human guidance that comes with capturing a performance and cleaning a performance up and working with the artist to deliver the best performance possible to bring that product together. It's a very sterile way to refer to music, but it's like, at the end of the day, no matter why you're creating a piece of music, that's like, we're just using terms. You've created a product,
for sure.
Whether it's for mass consumption or whether it's for the consumption at the local bar on open mic night. You've produced a product with the intent to do something, and generally that is to get into people's ears. That's the point.
For sure. That doesn't mean there can't be emotion and passion and meaning behind that. Certainly.
Absolutely.
But at the very root, that is what it is. We're not trying to sell any of that short. We're not trying to say that it's not, that anyone could do it, because clearly that's not the case for any of this stuff. We certainly couldn't, produce or write or do anything remotely resembling a song.
No, we tried at one point, and the results were so horrible we decided to never do it again.
Yeah, that was shelved immediately.
Unless someone wants to pay us to put together that old man pop punk emo band that is going to reignite like the sixth wave, then we'd be willing to throw our backs into that one.
Like, forget like post punk, like we are pre punk. That's our wheelhouse.
Primordial emo.
Oh my gosh. Can we just, that'd be amazing.
Oh, the mind shudders.
But this is something that, as 2 years ago, Zack would have thought that this was just a fun novelty. Current Zack knows that this is not going away, at least not anytime in the near future. So I ask you, as far as that future question goes, and I know this is always the other loaded question, 5 years from now, 10 years, however long into the future. I mean, as fast as AI goes, this could be 2 weeks from now. What does the landscape look like? Or do you think we stay in the same status quo that we're in today, as far as, kind of the very gray area between musicians and AI? Do you think there's more acceptance in the music industry, or do you think it's basically shunned altogether?
I think we're going to get to that level of industry acceptance, as I think it has to be inevitable. I mean, it's literally been this way throughout the development of the recording industry, where, in fact, you know what? Weirdly enough, I have another quote that might actually boost this idea. And it's something that, those in charge, nominally in charge, I don't think there's any head of music, but someone who's in a position, a high position in the industry, made that exact same point, speaking to the NPR in a piece back in April. And it's Mitch Glazer, the head of the RIAA. But he said this industry always seems to be the canary in the coal mine, both in adapting to new technology, but also when it comes to abuse and people taking what artists do. So they, realize that they're kind of the frontier, and are probably going to be the first to figure out what guardrails to put in place, what those guardrails look like, and then forcing everyone to kind of start to stay within those. And that'll really be the test. And I also think it's part of it, is not to mention that society in general hasn't come to any kind of grip with the technology yet, just in general.
Sure.
So it's still kind of, I think for the average person who doesn't have their hands in it on a daily basis, it's still kind of that futuristic thing. Like, yeah, they're working on it and they can kind of do some stuff, but right now it's not, for lack of a better term, it doesn't affect me yet. So I'll figure it out when that happens. And music isn't going, well, we don't have that. We don't have the luxury of waiting. We got to start working on this now. I think the landscape, as I said, eventually will come to a point where there'll be an acceptance and there'll be some level of restraint. And once we can agree on that level of restraint, like some songwriters already have, and, from that same piece in NPR, Mary Bragg, a singer-songwriter in Nashville, talked about, using that her and some of her peers use ChatGPT as, like I mentioned, a tool to overcome writer's block. And I say she hasn't used it, but she's been pleased that, I'll put some stuff in there, and actually it can add, that can make sense. I'll put some stuff in here and maybe I'll glean something that triggers a thought and follow that thread. And that's probably how the best way for songwriters to use something like this is not to write the song, but to be maybe to provide that spark to start a little bit of a fire. If ChatGPT is going to be their creative kindling, so to speak, then I there's the positive use to it. Now, are there unscrupulous songwriters who will use it to write the song? Sure. And I'm sure you can find those examples all over TikTok and YouTube right now.
For sure.
But, once we kind of compartmentalize those and let the real work get done with it, there's a lot of benefits there.
And I think, one area kind of, I guess my brain is just thinking in corollaries today. You mentioned guardrails. I feel like the guardrails, the restrictions, the ability to make sure that the folks who deserve compensation, who deserve credit, the folks who don't want their work associated with any tool, if there is a way for all of this to work in harmony, and like you said, maybe there's still going to be bad actors no matter what. But if there's a way, I kind of look at that differently from cryptocurrency, for example, as another very similar kind of slice of time thing where there was a big buzz and everyone was super into Bitcoin, but there was never any regulation. There was never any guardrails. And unsurprisingly, so many different people took advantage to great extents. There were, I would guess a large percentage of cryptocurrency projects were either scams from the very beginning or ended up becoming scams as folks realized, like, oh shit, there's a lot of money that I can make in this with relative impunity. That didn't completely end up being the case. There are at least some court cases involving cryptocurrency companies and members and so forth. But all of that is to say that was a sort of thing that maybe there would have been value in the technology side of things. You could, I guess, make an argument there, but I don't think it would have been as universal as something like AI would be, as potentially impactful to so many of us as AI could be. So I feel like, the guardrails are so much more important here than they were in cryptocurrency. And not to say that it's okay for anyone to get scammed. It sucks and it's awful. And, the folks responsible should be punished as they should be. But, with AI, like I said, this isn't going away anytime soon. This isn't going to be NFTs that come and go in like a 9-month period. So let's figure out how to make sure that the folks who should be getting something, should be being compensated by this are, make sure that if folks are not wanting to be a part of it, that they are able to opt out of it. These are very, very tall orders that I'm just throwing out there kind of willy-nilly. I understand that, but,
well, there's something you said in that stuck out to me. And it was at that point where people realized there was a lot of money involved is where things turned away from the good that the technology could come from to how I can make my peace with this.
Yeah.
And I think just like Glazer said about being the canary in the coal mine, we're already starting to see that come through for music in a couple ways. The ability to reproduce the voices is something that has already started to gain pushback. If you remember, I guess it was last year by now, when Heart on My Sleeve hit TikTok, and it sounded like a Drake and the Weeknd were their song.
Yeah.
And it was out there until the labels went after it and said, look, this isn't our people. It sounds like our people, but it's not our people. You got to get that taken down. Which is at that point where someone is making money and it's not from something that sounds like me, but that's not me. And that might be that tipping point where, all right, we've clearly established what the line is. And if you cross it, we're coming after you. But at the same time, and it's weird to say, but even states like Tennessee have made efforts to get ahead of this. Right. I don't know if you were familiar with the Elvis Act that was enacted several months back, offering protections against those deep fakes of voices, so to speak. And California has done something as well. So right now it's still a really, really loose a loose weaving of laws from state to state, because I know in California, like Bette Midler and Tom Waits went after ads that were made to sound like them after they declined to do it. Which, number one mistake, don't ask somebody to do it. They say no, and then just go, well, computer mommy says I can do it. Daddy said no, but computer mommy says I can do it. Like, nah, you're going to get busted. That's how that works, which is why California is working on stuff like that to protect, the entertainment industry.
And just to throw out there real quick, computer mommy, no relation to soccer mommy. Soccer mommy is wonderful. We adore soccer mommy. Computer mommy, perhaps not so much.
No. Although not a bad band name now that you think about it. Although it's a little too derisive now, so.
Yeah, it could be like a Radiohead side project or something.
Oh, I like where you're going with that.
But yeah, that's one area that I don't know. Maybe there is, so I don't want to say just blanket, but I don't know that there's a good reason, a good use case to be able to impersonate another person. I honestly cannot think of a single thing where I could be like, oh yeah, that technology wise, that could bring good to someone. I don't see that it could at all. So getting rid of that, sure, I'm good with that.
If I may refer back to that NPR piece from April 25th of this past year, that same Nashville songwriter, Mary Bragg, actually already found a counterpoint for you.
Oh, do tell.
If I may read directly from the story, because it's much easier than trying to. So I believe the story. Of course, I didn't take down the story. It's from NPR, and it was published on April 25th. And for Bragg, the most start. What?
That's a good day, April 25th.
Anyway. It's not bad. For Bragg, the most startling use of AI she's witnessed wasn't about stealing someone's voice, but giving it back. A friend sent her the audio of a speech on climate change that scientist Bill Wheel was preparing to deliver at a conference. Wheel had lost the ability to speak due to ALS, and yet he was able to address an audience sounding like his old self with the aid of 11 Labs, one of many companies testing AI as a means of helping people with similar disabilities communicate. Wheel and a collaborator fed 3 hours of old recordings of him into the AI model, then refined the clone by choosing what inflections and phrasings sounded just right. And that's like, and that is what makes this such a difficult thing to really, like, that right there broke through that guardrail you tried to set, but for a good reason.
Absolutely.
And that's the frustrating part is like you said, that we can imagine all of these scenarios where industries are wiped out and people are devastated and completely pushed out of a creative art. But it can also do something like this. And I'm sure there's plenty of other applications to help, like people communicate that are unable to give people back a voice instead of take it. And that's why it feels so weird to sit on the fence, but at the same time makes it right, because there are so many benefits here that it seems wrong to close that door along with the negative side.
Yeah, it's the eternal trade-off, right? Like being able to help some number of people in really cool and creative ways that humans just couldn't do. But on the other side, potentially hurt X amount of other people by, having work stolen, things like that. There's no easy answer. I think that's why it's such an intriguing topic.
Right. Unfortunately, if you were listening and saw the title of this episode and were thinking, yeah, these guys were going to have the answer for me, where no one else really has a clear one, I hate to break it to you now after you've listened to us babble for as long as you have, there just can't be right now. And that's the other thing, too. I think if you kind of look at a lot of these tools, they aren't at that point where they could completely replace human creativity.
Right.
And I would argue, I don't know that they ever will be.
Which is a good thing, I think.
I agree. I think there'll always be the telltale signs of humanity in a piece or the lack of humanity in a piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe not the classical Turing test, but something to that effect, to listen to a song and say, like, to my ear, I can tell that this was not a human created song.
Oh, we talk about it all the time in our reviews when we come through and make it a point when we're reviewing something and go, this is such an impactful piece because you can hear the emotion in so-and-so's vocals, or you can interpret these chords being played. You can feel what they're feeling just through their guitar work.
Because they're not perfect. They shouldn't be.
No. Which that also clicks back to Glenn's point that if everything is to be made perfect and sterile, what's the point of making it if it's all going to sound and feel the same? And that's really where the hard part to this whole point is, because music is not strictly an auditory experience is also an emotional experience. And there's no way to necessarily quantify that from person to person, which is what makes
That's
this doing what we do so much fun, but also makes what we do so frustrating.
it's a beautiful thing, you know. It's what keeps me coming back to. I mean, you and Jay smiling faces. I mean, that's cool too. But to be able to experience this very human thing is kind of a, you know, it's certainly the kind of, oh, it gives me faith sort of thing, that there's good going on, there's good happening in the world, there's good stuff being made, and there's good people making said good stuff. And maybe it's selfish of me, but I don't want that to go away.
I don't think anybody does, honestly. I honestly don't. I really don't feel like there's. I hate to say that. I'm sure someone will be contrary and give me 10 reasons why they prefer computer produced music with no human touch. But I highly doubt that, and I highly doubt that that will end up being in demand enough where you'll say, yeah, I don't want a person touching any part of my music enjoyment. I just want to hear the computer go bleep bloop.
Maybe there's something to be said about that as not a genre, but a category of music. You know, maybe that lends to
Well,
artists who come out and say, hey, I'm not using any sort of AI tools in the creation of this, in the production of this, in the mastering chain, in any of it. And maybe that in and of itself starts to produce its own audience, which if so, awesome.
how far away from are we away from the Grammys and the natural non-PED Grammys?
Oh my goodness. That's, I don't think that that's a I don't think that that's a far off conclusion, I guess. I think that there's definitely a possibility for that.
But I think you make a great point about that. If an artist, quote unquote, says, I'm producing all of this with AI, and here it is. Like this is what I use. As long as they're saying I used AI, this is what I used, this is what I came up with. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that as long as there's complete and openness about it.
And as long as whatever is being sourced by that artist, you know, if there are other artists' work involved in that, you know, it goes back to the whole compensation and credit and all that fun
Correct.
stuff.
And before we go too long rambling, there is one music generator that I came across that Wired did a piece on, and it's called Gen.
Yes.
And it says that it's licensed the training catalogs that it's been working with, and it promises to vet everything that goes into this and comes out of the system. So it's trying to be ethical and not violate copyright. The downside of this is that when Wired handed this tool to a panel of professional musicians, they found it to be meh,
Right.
meh. Like it was, to say the least, lacking. And if I may continue the ridiculous amount of quotes that I actually mined here, so I can pretend that I'm actually coming with sources from this piece. One of the people they handed Jen to was Jen Wassner, which I'm probably screwing that up, but of Wyoke and Flock of Dimes, who said there was in her use of the tool, there was never a point when I thought that's a cool idea. I always thought I could have come up with something cooler on my own. So that always leaves me the hope that, again, we'll get to a point where most people using this just realize this is a guidance tool. This is not the creation tool. And it should be best if I use this along with everything else. And it's just a tool in the toolbox instead of the whole machine.
And I could not agree more that with that article. I feel like the article itself almost had a sort of negative slant to it, like, oh, this tool sucks because it's not able to do what, you know, a Suno can do. But I looked at it like you did. Like, this is something where I can gain the inspiration that I might need, where I can maybe figure out how to replace a word with a different word and know that I can do it correctly, that I can do it ethically, that I can do it without inadvertently, you know, stealing anyone else's work. And also that I, as an artist, can know that, like, hey, I am not going to be replaced by this tool. I can still do the things that I love, that I've worked my ass off for years and decades to hone my craft and poured my heart and soul into. And, this, like you said, it's just another tool in the toolbox. It's just like a DAW. It's just like anything else that might be useful for a songwriter or artist or producer, etc. I was excited, honestly. I hope that there are more gens to come, or similar products that are guardrailed like that in the future.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's just the beginning of that. And as long as there are those on the tech side willing to put that effort in, I see a positive future for this. Again, not where it completely decimates the livelihood of musicians, but where it could only benefit and hopefully boost. And it's very easy to be cynical right now. It's very easy to be confronted with this and go, they're coming, they're about to take our jobs, and it's inevitable. And I'd like to hopefully leave you with the hope that no, but at the same time, we're also relying on other humans to feel that way too and act accordingly. So we always got to be on guard.
Yeah, we're cautiously optimistic. I feel like is maybe a fair status.
I think that's the best way to put it. I think that's the best. And again, if you have concerns, and I want to make this clear, we are not trying to push those off to the side and say, don't you worry, everything will be fine. So-and-so will take care of it. Zuck's got your best interest in mind, because first and foremost, we know that's never the right sentence. But second, again, it's cautiously optimistic. Accept the potential. There's good that can be done, and be on guard for the bad. And when we find the bad, do what we can to kind of close that off so it can't be a continued bad. And I hopefully that word vomit is a really good, at least for me, I think sums up where I feel on it and why, as much as I'm sure you come to this and hope someone makes a solid 2 feet planted on one side or the other. I can't yet.
Yeah. And maybe something happens in the future. Maybe we do this exact same podcast next year or the year after. And maybe we have a very different viewpoint, one side or the other.
I think that it'd definitely be worth revisiting, because if we do this again in a year or so, I say, well, we'll actually possibly have more material that's been released, hopefully with a proper attribution, to look back and go, was this a good idea or was this not a good idea?
Right.
Why or why not?
Yeah, that retro will be very interesting to see where we stand, and what will come. I said 5 or 10 years. It's the cycle is not going to take that long. A year or two with this stuff is
if that.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess the only question left is, did we miss anything? I mean, I'm sure we missed tons. Yeah. That's not the point. But based on what you came prepared with, have we covered everything?
Yeah, I think we covered everything that I had. I had just some notes jotted down. I know you had a ton of notes. You had more notes than me for sure.
I had quotes.
But yeah, I think we covered it, as well as we can, as we sit here in the middle of 2024, not knowing quite yet what comes ahead.
So I think it's fair to say the cheesiest of segues, that the next step in this conversation is for you to become a part of it and tell us exactly where you sit on the use of AI in music, where your hangups may be, and what you hope to see. And this is where I go, Zach, please pick up that card. We have all those things written down, and tell the nice listeners where they can join the conversation.
I can do just that, my friend. Yeah, we want to hear it all. Like I said in the early part of the show, good, bad, and different. Let us have it. Tell us how you feel about the topic. Tell us how you feel about how we feel about the topic. I think this is a topic that deserves dialogue and deserves discussion, and we're super excited to have it. We will be super excited to have it on Twitter, on Instagram, on Threads, on the fourth one. I can't remember. I do this every time. At Fairly KickAss on Twitter. I'm literally reciting it to myself to remember. At Fairly KickAss on Instagram. At Fairly KickAss on TikTok is the other one.
I'd say we had TikTok yet.
Threads, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. It's at Fairly KickAss across the board. Come find us. Come chat with us. Come let us know what you think. fairlykickass@gmail.com. If you have a longer form message, we certainly talked for quite some time, and y'all might as well, understandably so. Hit us up. fairlykickass.com is our website, which usually has a ride-along playlist for every podcast. Obviously, this one's not going to have that because there's really no music that is associated with it. But any of our previous episodes will have that.
No, but I think what we can do is facilitate some links. Like we can go back and I can share where I picked up some of my notes, where you picked up some of your material. And, if we happen to get said emails that make a good point, we can share them there as well with permission, obviously.
For sure.
But yeah, and it'd be also a good place for us to use as crib notes for said retro down the line. All we should have to do is go back and search the website for music and AI, and half of our show prep next year is done.
I like the way you think, my friend. If the listeners could do that for us for every show, I'd be much appreciated.
Always. But we'd have to tell them what we're doing farther out than we know what we're doing. So that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. Imagine knowing what you're doing before 2 days ahead of the podcast.
If there's anything that has been clear in the 4 years that this show has been made available to the public, it should be that we never know what's going on ahead of time.
I think it's charming. I don't know. I doubt it's charming. In my head, it's charming. That's how I get myself to sleep.
I was just gonna say, look, whatever we have to tell ourselves.
But yeah, if you want more of our probably not so charming voices, along with Jay, the third man here, who, like we said, was not present for this talk, he is present for previous episodes. You can find us anywhere where you get your podcasts. Just search for Fairly Kickass. You'll pull up this episode. You'll pull up all of our previous episodes. We post every Wednesday-ish, depending on when I actually get around to hitting the button.
We're pretty good about Wednesday, I must say.
The time is good. The time every single week is Wednesday at 8 a.m. because I can backdate it.
There you go.
Awesome. But yeah, we will be coming out with, I'm not sure what's posting next week, to be honest. But we will have something. We will have something next Wednesday.
Check this spot to find out what that is.
Oh, should we like and subscribe?
Oh, yeah. Like, subscribe, comment.
Do all the things.
Things
are good.
And stuff.
Any parting words before we land this plane?
No, I think that was it. Just do stuff and things.
Do stuff and things. There you go. Yeah. You heard it from the man. Do stuff and things. Good night.